the Financial Sense Midweek Edition with Jim Paplava, delving in depth with authors and experts into the key economic issues.
Joining us next on the program is author and investor Jim Rogers. His latest book, A Gift to My Children, A Father's Lessons for Life and Investing. Jim, you've often commented that you're probably the world's worst timer, but you've made some very astute calls over your investment career, one of them being your commodity call at the end of the 90s. How much of your travels around the world played into that call? Because nobody saw commodities as a new bull market back in 1998.
Well, I'm sure that my travels had something to do with it, just because I could see what was going on in the world, especially in Asia. But everything had something to do with it. I could also see that, nobody built any offshore drilling rigs for 15 or 20 years. I'd seen that farmers were starving, closing down, because agriculture was such a horrible business. I could see that supply was suffering for everything, and I could see demand booming. I mean, drive around Asia, time or two, and you would, certainly in those days, you could see, my God, something's going on here, and it was a boom. Still is.
One thing that I can recall you making a comment on my show back in 2002, in oil had just gone over $20 a barrel, and it was on its way. I think at that time that I did the interview, it was at $30. And I remember a comment you made on my program, and you said, we would unlikely to see $25 oil again. What did you see in the oil space?
Well, the same thing. I said a few minutes ago, I think the last boat for servicing offshore drilling rigs was built in 1981. Nobody was building drilling rigs. I could see that the North Sea was in decline. The production was in decline. I could see that Alaska, I could see that everywhere. I could see that China was going from being a net exporter to a net importer of oil. I could see the world was running out of known reserves of oil just by observing what was going on around it.
Now, a number of years ago, you moved your family. You sold your place in New York, almost at the top of the property market, and you moved to Singapore. Living in Singapore, has that given you a different perspective in terms of Asia? I mean, as Americans, we hear a lot of criticism about China and Asia, but being there on the ground in that culture, has it changed your views on anything?
Well, certainly. The reason I moved to Singapore was because I could see what was happening in Asia. I could see that China was going to be the most important country in the 21st century, whether we like it or not. And I wanted my children to speak Chinese, know Chinese. All the cities in China are too polluted for me, by the way, so we didn't move to China. But in Singapore, great education, great health care, everything works in Singapore. Probably the richest in the world if you just measure per capita foreign currency reserves. So we decided to move to Singapore. They speak English and Chinese in Singapore. And being there certainly shows me every day how dramatic and dynamic Asia is. Asian kids come out on top in all the international test results, as you probably know. My little girl is in the second grade in a public school. She has more homework in the year and a half she's been in school there than I had 12 years of school in the U.S. I mean, all this stuff about Asian education is true. They're educating their children. They make them work very hard all over Asia. You can see the work ethic everywhere you go. You can see the savings and investing everywhere you go. It's pretty startling.
One of the problems that Asia is dealing with now is inflation. A lot of the countries in that region, including China, pegged their currency to the U.S. dollar, and as Ben Bernanke expands the monetary base in the U.S., that has forced them to react in kind, creating inflation. Do you see a time, Jim, where that as they're tightening now, that they allow their currencies to float more freely, because it would be one way of combating some of the higher cost of commodities that we're seeing?
Well, I've certainly advocated that to the Chinese and to others. I've pointed it out. I'm not Chinese, so obviously they're going to do what they want to. But you're exactly right, that in your currency would help you with your inflation. They think that, the part of the problem with China is still some of the old-timers around afraid that the money will flee China. Some of it probably would, but also a lot of money would come into China if the currency were freely convertible. So they're worried about their export industries. I've explained that's not a problem. The Japanese currency went up 400 or 500%. Japan still has a balance of trade surplus with the United States. So this is not a real worry as far as I'm concerned, but I'm not Chinese. And by the way, they are letting their currency open more and more every month, every quarter. They do something else. And I would expect it to be freely convertible by 2010. It shows how much I know. But certainly in the next few years, they know they have to make it a fully convertible currency. They cannot have a major world economy.
Now, you've recently said that you're still currently long commodities and currencies. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And you've been long the dollar. Do you still hold those views? And can you tell us a little bit about your thinking on that?
Yes. I think every time I speak with you, Jim, I'm on my exercise bicycle. Here I am again. Just occurred to me that I think every time in the past I've been huffing and puffing. I'm not having a heart attack, I hope. If I am, you'll be the second to know.
I'll call 911 if I hear it.
Okay. Yes, I still own commodities. My view is that the secular bull market is still in place. If the world economy, on a shorter-term basis, if the world economy gets better, I'm obviously going to make a lot of money in commodities because of the shortages. If the world economy does not get better, I'm going to make money because then government's going to print more money. It's the wrong thing to do. Absolutely the wrong thing to do. But that's all they know. So that's what they'll do.
Well, that's the front page on Bloomberg this morning was a speech given by Ben Bernanke. He said, uneven recovery still needs stimulus, which translates to me, Jim, he's still thinking of printing more money.
Well, of course he is. That's all the man knows. He doesn't understand economics. He doesn't understand currencies. He doesn't understand finance. All he understands is printing money. His whole intellectual career has been devoted to the study of printing money. We've given him the printing presses. Come on, he's just an Ivy League professor. He doesn't know very much. And unfortunately, we're all going to have to pay the price. So I own commodities. I also own currencies because, there are huge imbalances in the world. The U.S. is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. You know who all the other debtors are. The largest creditor nations in the world are China, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. So these imbalances are going to play out more and more in the currency market. And I hope I get it right.
Well, speaking of imbalances in reaction to all of this money printing, last year we saw the price of silver go up 80%, and I think this year at one point it was up to close to 50%. And it would appear to me, Jim, that there are strong fundamentals in silver, but we've seen a pullback. Let's talk about that. Isn't that healthy when you see a run-up of a commodity? I think it was up 170 or 180% before it corrected. Isn't that healthy for a commodity? Because as we all know with any kind of asset, nothing goes straight up. Eventually it corrects. Is this healthy in your opinion?
Well, I own silver, and I was delighted to see it break and go down. I was actually on some TV show saying, gosh, I hope it goes down, because if it doesn't, it's going to turn into a parabolic move, and we'll have to sell. So I'm very pleased it went down. I want to own my silver for another 5, 10, 15 years, and hopefully it will go up, consolidate, go up, consolidate, go up, consolidate, and in 10 years, we'll all be absolutely stunned at how high the price of silver is. But if it goes up too fast, too far, you know as well as I do that all parabolic moves end in collapse, and I don't want to see that. I don't want to have to sell my silver. What would I do with the money?
One thing that was posed in the markets, especially when silver was going over 30 and it got into the $40 range, there were some what I call shortages of particular coins. Like it was difficult to get silver eagles. The U.S. Mint had been sold out. Dealers were charging premiums, and some would suggest that there was an actual silver shortage. But to my knowledge, Jim, the biggest buyers of silver in the world are in Asia and India. Did you experience or have you heard of stories in, let's say, India or Asia where there were shortages as appeared here, for example?
Well, yes. Whenever I go to China or Hong Kong, I try to buy silver coins, pandas they're called. And it's very difficult there for a while to get pandas. It still is. Still is difficult to get silver pandas. The gold ones are more readily available. But no, I certainly saw it. And I know that the Indians, a lot of Indians who are traditionally huge buyers of gold, started buying more silver. And the Chinese have gone, 1,500. That's expensive for a lot of people. So Chinese were converting to silver as well.
Something that I've seen in this country, my parents were born in Europe, and I'm a first-generation American. I would have never thought, Jim, looking at this country over the last couple of years, we used to criticize Europe for its social policies, but it seems like now we have socialization for the rich, hence the bailout of the banks. We have socialization for government workers and the poor. Has that surprised you that you would have to go all the way to Asia to find capitalism? And is it hard to believe and see the almost 180-degree turn the U.S. has taken over the last decade or so?
Well, it's certainly easy to see. I mean, if you go back to 1970 or 1960, 1980, you can see that under all of our administrations, we've become more and more centralized, if you will. I mean, Ronald Reagan in 1980 ran on a platform that we've got to do something about the deficit and the government. Under Reagan, the debt doubled. This was the man who was supposed to save the world from that sort of thing. And yet, even under him, debt doubled. So this process has been going on for decades. It goes faster at some times and slower at other times. But no, it doesn't surprise me. It's going to end that way. Jim, we're going to become more and more government-centered, more and more statist. It's not a good sign. China calls themselves communist, but I promise you, they're among the best capitalists in the world right now, if not the best capitalists in the world. And we, of course, the U.S., have become more and more socialist and more statist and more government-oriented.
How long do you think we can continue? I've heard figures this year, depending on who you read, that this year's budget deficit is going to be anywhere from 1.6 to 1.7 trillion. I was looking at some statistics. In the last decade, Jim, our total credit market debt went from 28 trillion to 52 trillion. At the same time, our GDP only increased by 4 trillion. So it looks like it's taking $6 of debt to create $1 GDP. How long can we continue to do this? I mean, we're the world's reserve currency, but at some point, when do the bond vigilantes show up?
I guess I'm one of them. I've stopped by. I'm waiting to short bonds. You're exactly right. I would have thought that by now people would say, this is insane. But then whoever would have thought that the central bank would step in and buy bonds? That's insane. Under the America that we know, or have known for decades. No, America is totally out of control. There's no way we can ever pay off our debt, ever. Just do the numbers, and you'll see that America cannot and will not pay its debt. Presumably, someday they will just inflate the currency, inflate the debt away. But that's another form of default. It's happening, Jim. It's happening. There's inflation in the land. Government lies about it, but it's here. I guess you know it. I certainly know it, and it's not good for America, not good for Americans, not good for the world.
I suppose you see more of this inflation than many people, because I know you do a lot of traveling, because Mr. Bernanke gave a speech once, and he was confronted on the inflation matter of the dollar, and he says, well, most Americans buy their goods in dollars, so he was dismissing the dollar depreciation argument, but as I take a look at our monthly trade statistics, just about anything I buy in the store here says made in China or made elsewhere. So in the long run, isn't the dollar dead like Keynes said?
Well, I happen to own the dollar at the moment, but I'm extremely pessimistic about the U.S. dollar. I am convinced the U.S. dollar is going the way that the pound sterling went. The pound sterling used to be the world's reserve currency, the medium of exchange. That changed. Everybody moved to the dollar. And unfortunately, the same thing is happening now. People are moving away from the dollar to other currencies. And, Jim, I don't see any hope for the dollar. As hard as I try to find something which will save us, it's very, very difficult to find something. You know, most countries that get themselves into this kind of situation don't really get out of it until there's a crisis or a semi-crisis. Well, unfortunately, we're headed towards a crisis or a semi-crisis. I'm not particularly happy about it, but I have to deal with facts, or I'll go down the tubes with everybody else.
Now, I want to come back to China for a moment, because you said if there's anything that could stop China in the future, it would be China's water problem. We know that a lot of the water supply in various parts of China have been polluted. Talk about that for a minute. How serious is that problem, and what are the Chinese doing to rectify it?
The water problem is not just polluted water, which they're working on, but also the fact that there's not enough water. You know, as your economy grows, people use a lot more water. They take baths, if nothing else, more often. So China's got a very serious water problem. By the way, India, northern China has a water problem. Northern India has a worse water problem, I should point out. Well, you live in the Southwest. We have a water problem in the southwestern part of the U.S. that we have to do something about. China is spending huge amounts of money to try to figure out to get more water or clean the water. You know, there's a lot of water in Siberia, for instance. You and I are not the only ones who know that China has a big water problem. As the economy continues to grow, they're going to have to find more water. Full stop, period.
I want to change topics, if I can, for a moment. One thing that we have seen are not only these big budget deficit numbers, but there is now a fight going on in Washington between both parties. A while back, they patted themselves on the back for, I guess, taking 3 weeks to cut $36 billion, and during the 3 weeks they took to argue over that cut, the deficit increased by $70 billion. And one of the problems that you've written about, others have talked about, is the influence of lobbyists in Washington, where basically these, I don't know, what is there, 40 or 50,000 of these guys in Washington, where they get to see all the senators and congressmen and the president in one location. And we went from, I don't know whatever happened to simplicity, but the bills that have come out of Congress over the last couple of years are 2,000 pages long. I couldn't read a book that long. I can't imagine any congressman would, but it would appear that many of these laws now are being written purely by lobbyists. So you've started something that is a movement, and it's called Promoting Government at Home. Tell us a bit about this. What's the purpose, and what are your goals for this movement?
Well, you make a very good point about the lobbyists. There are tens of thousands of them. Whenever there's a vote, the lobbyists are all standing outside watching the congressman go in, reminding them how they're supposed to vote. You know, the literature is full of cases where laws get changed because the lobbyists need them changed, etc. Well, in 1789, when they set up the U.S. government, you pretty much had to gather everybody in one place. Didn't have phones, didn't have email, didn't have much of anything. Just mail, and it was slow, not reliable. So we set up a government, as did every other country in the world, so we need the capital. You and I, if we were setting up something like that, we would use video conferencing, email, telephone. There's no reason for 535 people all together in one town to do anything. We could all stay home. And if, in my view, if every congressman had to stay in his own district and vote from his own district, the world would be a lot different. I doubt if Wall Street would have gotten bailed out for hundreds of billions of dollars if we all went down to the local high school gym and watched the congressman vote, or to his office and watched him vote. If the congressmen have to drive on the highways, local highways, send their kids to the local schools, buy their groceries in their local grocery stores, we would see them every day. They would know what's going on. But now they live in this rarefied atmosphere of Washington, D.C. They have very little clue about what's happening out in our world. So my view would be make them stay home. Everything we need to do now can be done from anywhere in the world. You don't have to go to Washington. And then if the lobbyists want to come see you, let them come see you in your own district. And then the lobbyists would have to go to 535 different locales in order to press their case. But at the same time, the local citizens would be right there talking to the congressman too. And when they would find out about bad laws, crazy bailouts, which are being imposed on all of us. I actually wrote about this. I wrote a book called Investment Banker back in the early 90s. And I could see then that the technology existed. But now, of course, the technology exists in spades. You can do anything now. And you don't have to worry about it being encrypted. Plenty of ways for it to be secure and safe. And as I said, if you and I were going to set up a government in 2015, we wouldn't set it up this way. We would set it up electronically.
So one of the problems, and one always gets the feeling when you hear politicians make talks about them, my favorite is when you see government officials or Wall Street tell us that there's no inflation. You almost get the feeling, Jim, that these guys live in Washington, somebody else does their grocery shopping and fills their tanks with gasoline.
Of course. They don't understand what's happening in the world, and they don't have to question things like that. They spend too much time to dinner with the lobbyists. They're going on special trips abroad with the lobbyists. No. You and I know this is inflation. Everybody listening to this knows inflation. But congressmen and Washington, D.C. either are unaware of it or they're just lying about it. In my view, the government is lying about it. They know there's inflation. Congressmen may not know because they don't go shopping.
With this movement, what do you hope to accomplish? Are you trying to get petitions, people to sign up? Jim, tell us a bit about it.
We've just barely gotten a website now, Jim. We've just gotten started. We're hoping that as more and more people think about it and understand the world, they will see that the world that they've known for 200 years can change. So we hope that people will become aware of it first, then that they will think about it, study it, come to the realization that it can work and it would be good for the country. And eventually, we would want congressmen to stay home. Sure, they got to go to Washington some. Don't have anything against that. But if they go to Washington a couple of weeks a year, that would be fine. That means they'll be spending most of their time with their constituents in the real world. But first, it's got to be education, Jim, and awareness. I suspect most people, if they even heard the concept, would say it couldn't be done, or it's a bad idea. Like with all new ideas, everybody ignores them at first, then they deny them, they argue against them, and they start to realize, oh, it's a good idea. And then they say, oh, I thought of it. It was my idea all along. So we're at the stage now where we just want to raise awareness and let people think about it.
Well, you have a diagram. I think this is from your website. The way it works right now, you have a diagram of corporations and special interest groups. Of course, they want favors from politicians. Then the diagram goes, these corporations and special interest groups donate to political campaigns. The money is then used to buy and influence elections. The politicians, they get their politicians elected. And then, of course, what happens is they propose legislation. In fact, much of this legislation is actually written by the lobbyists. I can't believe that some congressman had the insights or the work aptitude to put together a 2,000-page bill. But under your system, explain how that would work a little bit differently. Number one, if they're all working out of their districts, it's it's going to be a lot more expensive for some lobbying firm to travel around the country to contact 535 congressmen and senators.
It would take a huge effort by any lobbyist, both in terms of money, time, to visit 535 districts would take you well over a year. So you're not going to have some of these shoddy overnight laws passed. As you point out, these laws 2,000 or 3,000 pages long. Nobody's read them. The congressmen receive them at night, late afternoon, and the next morning they have to go vote. No, the lobbyists and the staff, with the direction of the lobbyists, write our laws and change our laws. Most congressmen don't even know what they vote on. Well, I don't think that would be happening. You wouldn't have 2,000 or 3,000 pages of laws. And if you did, the guys in your district would know what's in it that's good for them and what's in it that's bad for them. And you would have your constituents telling you what they want, not the lobbyists walking the corridors of Washington, D.C.
Jim, before we end, can you tell us a little bit about, you did something you talked about, and you said it was a mistake earlier on in your life where you thought having kids was kind of like a dumb idea, but now you have two of them, and you wrote your last book was called A Gift to My Children, A Father's Lessons for Life and Investing. And I wonder if you just spend just a few moments as we end telling how much children have changed your life.
Well, all my life I was against having children. I thought children were a terrible waste of time and energy and money. I just felt sorry for people who had children. I really felt sorry for my friends who had children. It was not something I was ever going to do. Well, I did it, and boy, was I wrong. I was totally wrong about children. My first little girl was so much fun. I couldn't get enough of her 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so we did it again. And I'm telling him, this is just the most I can imagine, these two little girls, and watching them grow and helping them grow. There's nothing quite like it. Everybody listening to this, if they haven't done it, I urge you to get home and get on with it. Take the day off. Well, maybe you shouldn't take the day off these days. These are perilous times. But go home for lunch. Have a lunch hour. I'm telling you, little children are just so fun.
And the book that you wrote, what prompted that? Because, you've written a number of books from hot commodities to adventure capitalist to investment biker and to a bull in China. This was a different book for you.
Well, it started because I kept thinking of things I wanted to teach them, and they were too young for me to teach them some things, such as saving your money and, what kind of career in life to pursue. So I started writing them down, and a journalist, a Japanese journalist, actually called me once to tell me some of the things you're telling your children. She was asking specifically about investing, but then that turned out to be a very successful article for her, a few more times. And then the next thing you knew, a Japanese publisher wanted to publish it as a book, so the book was published in Japan, and it grew and grew and grew, and then I did it here. Put together, many of us had plenty of failures in my life and a few successes, so I wanted them to learn from the things that I've done right and the things that I've done wrong. Hopefully they'll evolve and understand them as they get older, and it will help guide them. I hope I can tell them and teach them things myself, but some of this is all now written in a book, and they can pick it up and look at it anytime they want to.
You have had a long, successful career in investing, and recently you've been urged to write an autobiography. Would you ever consider doing that and sharing maybe not only your successes that you have had, but also the things that didn't go right and what you learned from them? I think that would be a great addition to the investment world.
Well, I'm thinking about it. My agent, my publisher are after me to do memoirs or something. I'm thinking about it. There's a chance I'll do it, Jim. I'm flattered you even know that I've been thinking about it, and I'm flattered you think it would be good. I'm thinking about it, and chance I will do it. You'll know if and when I do it.
Okay. Well, Jim, as always, I appreciate you joining us on the program. Glad you got a little exercise in there. If you'd like to follow Jim's new project, Government at Home, there's a website. It's www.gov, that's G-O-V, at home.com. That's GOVATHOME.com. GovAtHome.com. And also you can follow